Coming up next on The Voice of Alabama Politics, our guest today is Senator Roger Bedford, Democrat of Russellville. Also, the V team will take a look at the governor's State of the State address. And citizens beware, lawmakers are back in Montgomery. All this and much, much more coming up next on The V. Welcome to The Voice of Alabama Politics, where we tackle the tough issues so you have the hard facts. I'm your host, Bill Britt, and I'm joined today, as always, by the V team. Welcome all.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Morning.
Baron Coleman's out again this week, but we're happy to have the irrepressible Jack Campbell.
Thank you. I appreciate being here.
We always love to have you. Listen, we've got some happy announcements to make. The V is now on in Montgomery on ABC 32. It will air Sunday at 11 o'clock. Tune your VCRs, your DVRs, or whatever kind of R you got.
If they still have VCRs, we're in pretty good
Yeah, I
shape.
guess. Well, I just dated
Rabbit
myself,
ears
didn't
on
I?
top of the...
Tune in your rabbit ears to
Well, everybody's excited that we're coming to Montgomery, Alabama. That's the state capital, so it's fun to... Excellent in Birmingham, but it's fun to come to the state capital.
Especially
during the legislative season. Yeah, during the season.
I get to hear from more people how fat I look on camera, so I'm happy to.
Well, listen, we're just excited that we've been able to grow this much so far and so quickly. A lot of stuff going in politics these days, and everybody wants to know what's happening. The governor had his State of the State address and got a great reception from most, not a lot from the Democrats, but Governor Bentley said he's got a big wish list. The top two things are pay raises for teachers, and he wants a pay raise for state workers. Claire, what do you think?
Well, you know, there's not surprise that the Democrats are against what he had to say and Republicans are. That's traditional. As far as the raises for teachers and for state employees, you know, let's face it, it's an election year where, you know, primaries are in June, and that is not really uncommon. And 2% raise for the teachers is really not out of line, I don't think. I think he's asked for a 4% raise for state employees. I don't know that they'll get that, maybe 2%. We'll see. But I think they're probably warranted. He just wonders if the general fund budget can actually handle that for the state employees, because that is the budget that is really in dire straits here in our state.
And that was the big topic at the beginning of the week when the different state agencies held their budget hearings on Monday before the State of the State, and they laid out their needs. And a big issue was that the general fund is expected to shrink about $80 million this next fiscal year, while the Education Trust Fund is expected to grow about $135 million. Right. So there's some talk about, at least from the judiciary, from the court system, about combining those two budgets.
Correct. They talked about that last year, and people kind of dug their heels in the sand because, you know, you get to a turf war and do these chairmanships want to give their money up. And a lot of states do have a combined budget. So I think it's something maybe to consider down the road the next quadrennium, I would think.
It's a complicated process.
Yes.
And you sound exactly like Senator Arthur Orr. That was one of the questions he was asked, and he said, you know, I think that's something for us to look at the next quadrennium. Well, of course you don't want to look at it in an election year.
Right.
Right.
So that would be too tough to handle.
Kick the can down the road to next year.
Well, you know, Texas did this several years ago, so that might be a model. The other thing the governor talked about was he wants to promote education and jobs, jobs, jobs. Any thoughts on that, Jack?
You know, I listened to the speech, and my take was that he started out sounding like LBJ in the Great Society about how poor Alabama was, and he ended up at the end sounding like Ron Paul. It kind of was a little disjointed to me to talk about what dire straits we're in, yet we don't want, you know, we don't want any edicts coming out of Washington as to how we spend our money. I don't disagree with that, but I just thought the speech was a little disjointed.
But it did a good job, though, I will say this, of echoing his campaign platform. If
Oh,
you've
absolutely.
seen around Montgomery
And his
especially.
accomplishments, and he's done a great job, I think, overall.
Well, and he talks about poverty. He's looking at the black belt because people are always wanting to do something for the black belt. And it's education and jobs that are going to help these people in these rural parts of Alabama.
Now you've heard our reaction. We want you to take a look at some clips from Tuesday night and see what other people were thinking about the governor's State of the State.
No, I was pleased with the State of the State address tonight. I really was pleased by the governor's stand on the Obamacare, Medicaid expansions. I think the comments he made about the state of Alabama being sovereign like the other 50 states, if more states would take the solid fiscal conservative stand that Alabama's trying to take, we wouldn't have $17 trillion in debt.
Bill, it's real disappointing. He basically says he's going to give educators a 2% pay raise. They're down 10% over 4 years since they've taken 2.5% out of their paycheck. They've given them 4% if they get the 2% he mentioned tonight. So do the math. It's negative 6%. The other thing, state employees will not get a pay raise. It's just political rhetoric to get him through the campaign season. The Medicaid budget's already $100 million in the hole. So he said state employees will get a 4% pay raise if the money's there. But two things. I mean, two major issues. We're offering a $1 cigarette tax and let the people of the state of Alabama vote on it. We're proposing a lottery for education, and again, to let democracy work, let the people vote on it.
In terms of the Medicaid part, I've always said the decision about Medicaid expansion is the governor and the legislature. You know, he talked a bit about the reform and transformation we're trying to make in Medicaid. So what we will do is what we've been doing. Dedicate ourselves to get Medicaid in the very best possible shape that consumes the least reasonable amount of resources and provides the highest quality care to our citizens. And then ultimately the decision about expansion is other people's.
We have the highest graduation rate we've ever had in the state. It's at 80%. We released that today, so we're showing a great return on investment of what we're doing in education. I was pleased to hear him say the expansion of pre-K, because we know poverty is such an issue with our students, and if we can get them started earlier, we know it will make a big difference for us. So overall, we're pleased. Had a great meeting this morning with the legislative committees that will be determining our budgets. Great response to our request. We know it's going to be a challenge, but we'll look forward to working with them.
Well, they covered the gamut from education to Medicaid, Republican, Democrat. What's y'all's take?
I think one of the first things that it's important to point out is, as Mr. Bice said, is the progress that Alabama has made in education. I do think that that is a strong point for us. The graduation rate in Alabama has increased 5% in 1 year, so we're now at 80%, which is incredible considering the fact that we've been in proration and folks are having to tighten their belts.
Right.
Well, I think, you know, Craig Ford again said we want to raise a 1% tax on cigarettes. You think something like that's ever going to fly?
I think that's unrealistic. In an election year, number one, and then, and quite frankly, the tobacco lobby is so strong in Alabama, it would be unprecedented that would happen.
I was
They
surprised.
just need to leave whiskey alone.
For 3 cents, they need to leave all the
right?
Yeah. That demon whiskey, we want to leave that alone.
Well, one of the issues that I think that Beeson talked about is Common Core.
Right.
And just from watching the news this last week, one of the things that I think is going to be a really big issue is the push from the Tea Party contingent that wants Common Core to be an issue, and the push back from the leadership that says we're not going to touch that this time.
Right.
Yeah, I think that is a big issue that was not discussed, and also prison overcrowding and prison reform, because, you know, as we've looked back this past year since we got out of session, there's been a lot of committees, a lot of oversight. Senator Ward's chaired things, and there are tremendous problems in the prison system just as they are in Medicaid. And so I just think that's another boiling pot of the state that they're going to have to look at, is this prison system.
With regard to Common Core, you have the Tea Party folks who are pretty lathered up and against the Common Core, yet the leadership is saying, they're digging their heels in saying, we're not touching Common Core. To me, it's kind of a double standard to say, we're not going to take your Washington money, but we'll take your Washington you know, your ideas on how we should run our education system. It's kind of strange.
Well, and you know, we heard from the AEA that their membership's about 50-50 split on Common Core, as to some of them are for it, some of them are against it. One of the interesting things, though, is this Tea Party bunch, they're not going to back down. I think you know, the Republican supermajority is in, they put them in office. So I think
And
they've
they've
got
said
some
that.
problems.
They've said, we put you here in 2010, and now we expect to make good on getting you in office.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if the Tea Party people go out and try to recruit candidates to run against some of the incumbents and leadership that won't bring these
Well,
issues
time
up.
is ticking on recruiting candidates.
That's
Yeah,
correct, because the
absolutely.
window is very short.
Well, listen, we've got a lot of stuff we've got to cover this half hour. You're watching The V, the voice of Alabama politics, now in Montgomery on ABC 32.
Here's what customers are saying about WeatherGuard Lifetime Metal Roofing.
It has reduced our electric bill. I can't remember how much. He pays all the bills, but it's lower.
They clean up as they go. There was no mess.
Hello, I'm Robert Wells, president of WeatherGuard. We are a family-owned business, and we will back our lifetime warranty for generations to come.
Come by our showroom on Alton Road in Birmingham. WeatherGuard Lifetime Metal Roofing, 533-7322.
I teach. I touch the future. I am AEA.
I keep the school clean every day for your children. I am AEA.
Congratulations on your scholarship. I help children make choices for college and careers. I am AEA.
We are AEA.
Welcome back to the voice of Alabama politics, where our guest today is Senator Roger Bedford, Democrat from Russellville. Thank you, Senator, for being with us today.
Bill, it's a pleasure. I'm a fan of your show.
Well, thank you very much. We've watched you over the years, and you've done a lot. And I know you have a lot of things coming up this year, and we appreciate all the work you've done.
Thank you very much.
This week, the governor in his State of the State said once again that he would not expand Medicaid in Alabama. I think you have some issues with that. Would you share with us about that?
I certainly do, and I certainly respect our governor. He's a fine gentleman, but he is just dead wrong on this issue. It is an issue that affects all Alabamians, and I'd like to try to explain that in the brief time we have here. First off, it's a quality of life issue. You've got 350,000 Alabamians right now that are working. They're paying taxes. They're making between $7.50 and $11.50 an hour, but they don't have any health insurance, and they can't afford it in the private marketplace. Then you have the economic side of it. Those people are not being able to buy preventive care, and so they're going to the emergency rooms at hospitals. Hospitals are not being compensated at the level they once were under the disproportionate plan. And to break it down as simple as I can, when the U.S. Congress passed the Affordable Health Care Act, or Obamacare, whatever you want to call it,
right,
these people were mandated because the federal government is paying 100 cents of the dollar for all 50 states to roll out the Medicaid expansion for the working poor. And the U.S. Supreme Court, when the Republicans challenged it, the only thing they said wrong with Obamacare was you can't mandate a state to roll it out. It's got to be an option. But why wouldn't a state do it? Because the Congress was going to pay for it. Well, guess what? When Congress said we're going to pay for this, these people who have no insurance by Medicaid, then they took away the disproportionate share that goes to a hospital because they never saw the Supreme Court taking it apart, making two pieces out of it.
Right.
So what's happened since October? Our rural hospitals have lost $14 million in uncompensated care. 4 hospitals have already closed in Alabama. There may be as many as 25 or 35 closed if we do not roll out Medicaid. You know, you lose a hospital in a rural area. For instance, Fayette, the hospital there has 301 jobs. They're concerned about whether they can stay open or not. If you don't have a healthcare delivery system in your county, such as a hospital, then the doctors go away because they don't have anything to refer to it. And so you try to recruit an industry into a rural county, like the governor was talking about, some of those rural counties, we've had some success.
Right.
You don't have a hospital there, they're not going. Well, Roger, why won't Governor Bentley do this? I will say this to the governor. He's been straight up front with me for 2 years over it. He said nobody's going to get to the right of him on Obamacare. Well, this is a Medicaid expansion, and I told him I expect more out of my governor than that. He's the sixth one I've served under. Here's what it means to Alabamians. 350,000 people would receive health care coverage under the Medicaid expansion, paid 100% by the federal government the first 3 years, back down over a 3-year period to where we would pay 10 cents on the dollar. They would put up 90 cents, the federal government, we would put up 10%. Then those people suddenly are like consumers. Think about it. They can go to the dentist, they can go to the doctor, they can go to the hospital for preventive care instead of acute care, which costs 10 times as much. So it's a no-brainer when you think about it both from the quality of life issue and the economic development issue, because it's going to create 30,000 new jobs over 6 years. It'll be the biggest job bill we've had in the history of this state.
Right.
You know, we paid $158,000 a job to get Airbus here, and I'm proud they're here. But the federal government's going to pay us $24 billion over the next 6 years if we will participate. It'll cost the state about $700 million to cover that 10%. And guess what it's going to do? It's going to generate $1 billion in new tax revenue without raising taxes. We're creating jobs and putting people to work. That's what Roger Bedford believes in. And this needs to be done in Alabama. I've introduced a bill to do it last year. My Democratic colleagues have introduced a bill to do it this year. David Bronner has been very outspoken about it. And I think it's the right thing to do, both for economics, to save our rural hospitals, quality of life, to help people in this state, and create 30,000 new jobs.
Well, and you seem to think, and many people do, that this is more about politics than it is about good policy. I mean, if the governor wants to create jobs, those people have to be healthy people to go to work.
That's correct.
And what we see a lot of is Walmart workers or big box company workers who just, they work themselves to death, but they don't get coverage. Alabama takes a lot of money from the federal government. Why not a little more?
Well, I agree with you, because here's the kicker. I hope our viewers understand this. If Alabama does not take this money, guess what? Your taxes are not going down. Our dollars are just going to go to some other state to cover their working poor there.
One of the other things that has been really surprising to me to discover is that Alabama is the only state that does not allow for expungement of criminal arrest records. You plan on changing that, don't you?
I hope to. I had a bill that we got through the Senate last year that I hope to bring out of judiciary this year. This is what happens in Alabama. 4 kids are riding in a car in high school or college. They get pulled over. There's some marijuana in the car. All 4 will be charged with it. Then as the criminal process goes through, one of them will end up being the claimant for the marijuana. The other 3 charges are dismissed. But guess what? They stay on their records for life. There needs to be a way, if you're found not guilty, the charges are dismissed or null-prossed, where you can have your record cleaned up, because it affects employment opportunities in the future.
We've got about 1 minute left. What do you think is the biggest issue facing the legislature this session?
I think the Medicaid rollout is the #1 issue. Secondly, there'll be some budget challenges, but our teachers deserve a pay raise. They deserve 6%, both for active and retirees. We can afford that if we make it a priority. State employees deserve a raise as well. It's been since 2007 since they've had one. I support that.
You're running for re-election. How do you feel about your chances?
Well, the best way to run is like you're 2 votes behind. And if you work a little harder, you'll find those 2 out there.
Well, thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Bill.
Our guest today has been Senator Roger Bedford from Russellville. We'll be right back. You're watching The V.
I make sure to get your kids to school and home safe every day. I am AEA.
I make sure your child receives a healthy meal each day. I am AEA.
Thank you, AEA, for protecting our public schools. schools and our futures. We are AEA.
Welcome back to the Voice of Alabama Politics. Our guest, Roger Bedford, had a lot of great things to say, but I know, Claire, you were mentioning something during the break.
Yes, we all got so carried away in the last segment, but I wanted to mention about the state employees increase. That is a conditional appropriation in the general fund budget. And so that's a very big difference as opposed to just an increase, because that means if the money is there, they'll give it to them. And the way it looks today, it probably won't. The thought is he does want to give it to them.
Okay. Well,
and it's the thought that counts.
Right.
Yeah, right, unless it's your paycheck. Anyway, Roger Bedford, Senator, had a lot of things to talk about. Main thing was Medicaid. What are you thinking about that?
That's still a big issue in the state, and one of the reasons it will continue to be a big issue no matter what the administration chooses to do about expansion is that there will continue to be additional people who come onto the Medicaid rolls, because regardless of whether the state expands, there were some eligibility requirements that were relaxed.
There was like 300,000 is what we're looking at. That's
yes, and all of those folks. Well, there's another division or another little carve-out group that would be eligible anyway under some of the changes that were made back 2 years ago, and so you'll have a rather large segment of people who will come onto Medicaid who are newly eligible. About 74% of those are supposed to be children. But Alabama will not be receiving the federal funds, the increase that we would if the state were to participate in the expansion. So it's going to get even more expensive for Alabama to have to prop up Medicaid.
How much of this is just plain old politics?
All of it.
Really?
Most. I mean, I listen to Roger, and he's an old friend, but he towed the Democrat line on that issue, and I think Bentley towed the hard Republican line on that issue. And I think if you poll it in the state, from what I understand, numbers suggest that majority of Alabamians don't favor the expansion of Medicaid into the state. So, but I've not seen actual numbers.
But you know, and I have to agree with Jack. As a conservative, I mean, you're going to allow over 300-something thousand people to come into this Medicaid, Obamacare, Affordable Care Act, and then another 4 years you're going to throw them out in the streets. I mean, you know, we've got to come up with money. The bottom line is it's a burden and it's too much money, and we cannot take that on. And as we all know, it's pregnant women and children that are covered first under the agency, then senior citizens.
But let's be clear, though. It's not throwing them out into the streets after 4 years. There's a 100%, a 96%, and so
it's a phase-in of money of what they will pay.
But it's still better than 94% that the federal government will
Well, we're all about states' rights in Alabama. We're a conservative state, and that's the majority of the membership. And as Jack mentioned, that's how the voters feel, ultimately.
But since when did Alabama ever turn down any federal money? When they had the whole rollout of the Obama, the big giveaways, we took all that money. I mean,
that's
really.
True, that's true.
And the excuse was, well, if we don't take it, somebody else will.
Federal disaster programs. Yeah. The tornadoes in Tuscaloosa, we took federal money then.
So it's like Jack says, it's a lot more politics than anything else. I know another thing that probably is not politics so much is this new voting rights act deal that came up down in Greenville, isn't it?
In Evergreen, right outside of Greenville, yeah.
Okay.
And to some degree that is politics as well. As many of you remember, back this summer, the Supreme Court essentially eliminated Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act in the Shelby County case. And so what was interesting then is that means that none of the laws that pertain to voting and elections in Alabama, they don't have to be pre-cleared anymore through the Justice Department. However, the reason that the decision out of Evergreen is significant is a federal district judge said Evergreen is the one city in Alabama that will now have to seek pre-clearance if they seek to change any of their voting laws or any of their election standards, and that's a pretty big deal. She did it under the Section 3 of the Voting Rights Act. So the plaintiffs had to show actual discrimination.
So basically in a county that was majority black, they created districts that were served by majority white on their local, was it council?
City council?
That's right. There were they sort of gerrymandered the districts so that there were 5 districts, and out of those 5, 2 were predominantly black, even though it's a majority-minority population in Evergreen. Now, it is important to note, for Evergreen's sake, that it was a consent decree. So the city of Evergreen and the plaintiffs entered into this agreement about allowing federal observers in. But But for the folks in Alabama who thought the Voting Rights Act was dead, this is an important decision because it shows it's not. Right.
Well, it's not just Alabama. I mean, you know, we get a lot of bad publicity because of our past, but, you know, you can go north, south, east, west. There's discrimination everywhere. Sure. I mean, you know, there's just
they
different
kind of zero
schemes.
in on Alabama for some odd reason.
Well, you know, the heart of Dixie, the heart of the Confederacy, we're going to take it. You know, but listen, we love the state or we wouldn't live here. You know, we have choices of places we can live. And I want to go back to one thing that the governor did talk about in his State of the State, and that was about when he used to give free health care to poor, indigent folks. I really found that interesting about him. I think that's what people like about Robert Bentley.
Robert Bentley is a great guy, personally great guy. He grew up poor in Shelby County. His dad ran a sawmill. He had several brothers and sisters. They didn't grow up with anything. He made it all himself. He does have an affinity for people who are not, you know, as privileged as others. He doesn't belong to a country club, and he's just, you know, kind of one of us. And I think that's why people connect with him.
He really looked like he came into his own with this State of the State. Don't you think, Claire?
I think he did a great job. I think as far as his delivery of a State of the State speech, I thought he did an excellent job last night.
I might have written it a little differently, but I think he made he was able to tout his accomplishments, and there are numerous.
Well, I think you're right about that.
Well, one of the things I think the proof will be in the pudding is during this legislative session, what will we see that will come out of the legislature that supports the platforms and the ideals he put forth in his State of the State address?
Well, you know, he can only do so much because, you know, he doesn't have a vote over there. But, you know, the legislators will ultimately make that. We'll see how well they work with him.
Yeah, and I think they've missed the boat by not working closer with Governor Bentley, because I think he kind of has the heart of the people. I really do think he does. Speaking of Love Fest, our very own Jonathan Barbie, our producer here at the V, got engaged on New Year's Eve to Joanne Sellers. We want to share a clip with you of that happy occasion. We wish them all the best. We are the V, and we'd like for you to know that we're watching politics for you. You can catch us every week at ABC 3340 or now in Montgomery at ABC 32. Thank you for watching the V.
And so you decided to give me something for Christmas every year, and I thought what would be a perfect Christmas gift is that you spend the rest of your life with me. And I want to know if you will marry me.
Oh, you made me so happy.